everyone, how are you? My name's Donny Carr. I'm one of the Beatport Beats in School Season 2 winners, representing Mousetrap. Today I'm going to break down my winning track, Luna Brave. So let's dive in, and I hope you enjoy. Okay, before we get started here, there's just a couple things that I wanted to mention briefly. The first thing is, this isn't the final version of this track. I ended up, bouncing out stems and doing a mix down. So it's not going to sound exactly the same as the final finished version. Also, I will be hopping back to some earlier projects so I can show you how I've made a few key sounds that are bounced out to audio in this project. I just feel this project here is the best project to do most of the breakdown in. There are some parts that are bounced to audio, which I'll do my best to remember how I made them, but I still think there's lots of good little tidbits of information here for you, so let's get going. How I'm going to do this is I'll start with the drums. We'll have a look at the drums first, and then we'll just move on to the bass sounds, and then the synth parts, and then we'll have a quick look at the effects. So we'll just start at the top here and start with the kick. So this kick is made up of two different kicks, a low kind of subby 808 style kick, and then I paired that with a kick that just had a really nice clicky top end, nice little top transient, and I paired those together, EQ'd them to fit, so obviously rolled off the top end on the low kick and vice versa on the top kick. I sent them both to a group where I did a little bit of saturation and some parallel compression just to help glue those two kicks together. And I can't show you that here in the mixer because I bounced it out to audio. But I do have some EQing here on the kick. Let's have a quick look at that. So on this particular kick, I rolled everything off below 30, scooped out a little bit around 190. That's something I do quite often. I usually take out a little scoop out of the kick around 200 hertz-ish. That's where a lot of elements kind of overlap. So you'll have, your bass right there. You'll have maybe the low end on, synth parts or maybe a vocal. So I find just scooping a little bit out of that area on the kick just helps everything sit together more comfortably. I also scooped out a little bit around 600 here, probably just to make room for, synths and what have you. I don't always do that. And then I just rolled off the very top end just to soften the kick up a little bit. So, now this kick is being sent through these auxiliary tracks here, or this auxiliary track here, which is a short little reverb. And that's something I don't usually do. Occasionally I will. So it's just a really short little ambient room reverb from Valhalla Room, really short decay, and then just rolled off all the low end on this track and gave it a little touch of this Wave Shaper plugin just to give it a little extra oomph, a little boost, some subtle distortion. The reason I did that is because I have all my other drums going through the same reverb here. So essentially my thought was I just want to put all of my drums into one single space so they kind of feel like they fit together a little bit better. And again, I don't always do that on the kick, but in this particular case I did. So that's pretty much it with the kick, really simple. let's move on. The next thing we have here is the claps. So they're introduced in this first little breakdown here. And yeah, there's some volume automation here. They fade away as the little break progresses, and then they come back in. There's also that little clap delay that you heard there, which just happens in a few spots throughout the track, just for some subtle variation. And then I have a little clap accent here that pops in on occasion. It's quite subtle, but you can hear it here. Right there. And that little accent's kind of panned a little bit over to the left side. A little EQing there. Rolled off the lows, gave a little boost around 4K-ish, and then I used this defacer plugin to just give it a little touch of distortion. The main clap, I'm sure it came from one of my sample packs. Just a clap that I thought fit nicely, and I probably did a little bit of processing before I bounced this audio clip out, but I can't remember exactly what I did. And then all my claps, the little clap accent, the little clap delay, they're all being sent to this group track here, where I have a little bit of compression happening with the SSL bus compressor, just to kind of gel those things together and just tighten the sound up a little bit. Without it. I mean, pretty subtle. We're only getting about maybe 1.5, 2 dB of gain reduction there. So I just think it's helping those kind of gel together in a nice way. All right, and then I just have this little slick EQ here, which is a freebie, I think. Still, it was anyway, with a little roll off, everything below 200 hertz, which I just felt was unnecessary, and looks like I took off some of the top end on this and gave a little boost at 2.5K here. And then this is just for automation here. So that is the claps. Okay, and then we have some snares here, little like snare accents to keep things interesting. And there's some automation here because I'm kind of automating some parameters on, let's see. So first we have an EQ, rolled off the lows, rolled off the very top, took out some harsh frequencies here at 3K. And then I have a delay, which is being automated. So I think I'm automating the distortion level, and I think I'm even pulling the offset a little bit to widen out certain hits, just to give some subtle variations on those little accents. Yeah, let's check it out over here. Yeah. And that's just, you know, some random snare that I found in one of my sample packs that fit nicely. And then I just gave Gave it a little touch of reverb as well, and a little, actually, yeah, side chained it pretty aggressively. Let's see. Probably shape the envelope too. So yeah, just a really short, tight envelope on this. I mean, that's what it sounds, completely open. More often than not, I usually find myself tightening envelopes when I use samples. I always seem to have too long of a tail for the most part. Okay, so let's move on. Let's backtrack here a little bit. And we have these little percussion grooves. So this is the first one, and it's kind of just fades slowly into the mix. It's kind of building the energy. Let's come over here and listen to it. Just a really simple little kind of short percussive hit with some delay on it, and it's kind of panned over to the left. You know, this is something that I made on the spot and then bounced out right then and there, but I just, you know, rolled off the low end here. And then I have another one, which is also being faded in slowly. I know this second one here is just simply white noise with a really tight envelope and probably some additional modulation. But again, I bounced that out right then and there. But these two little groove loops are just meant to fill things out and build the energy throughout the arrangement. If you're interested, I have a couple videos on my YouTube channel where I make these little percussion counter rhythm grooves. So you can just search counter rhythm on my YouTube page and you'll find a couple videos there. But let's move on. Okay, so that's all of the percussion. There's not a lot of percussion in this track. So we have this hi-hat, which is the main hi-hat. Let's unsolo that. I mean, pretty basic here. The hi-hat has a few little EQ notches, just taking out some harsh frequencies there, and then also some delay. See, the hi-hat's kind of leaning slightly to the left, so I just added this simple little delay plugin, and it's playing eighth notes, and I just panned the delay off to the right to kind of offset the hat, and it just gives it a little extra groove too. And then I have looks like a LFO controlling the decay on this hat. And it's not moving now, so I'm probably turning that on, that LFO on in certain sections of the track, but I can't remember, but yeah. Okay, so then we have this little top loop here. It's a nice kind of shakery, you know, shakery, it's not shaker-esque little loop there. That sounds like a tambourine too. But that just grooves along. It just helps tie all the hi-hats and everything together. And then I just gave that a little a little touch of distortion with this defacer plugin, and kind of cleaned it up with this Harrison EQ, you know, rolling off everything below around 1K, and even took a little bit of the top end off. And again, this was just a loop. I'm assuming it's probably longer, and I just took the first bar. Oh, maybe not. So yeah, just a short little top loop there. And then these darker sections here are just a subtle variation where I just made a copy of it, and I just pitched that copy down by a few cents. And I placed those in the breakdowns. So then when we pop out of the breakdowns, you just get a subtle lift in the pitch on that top loop there. Okay. And then we have this tambourine, which I'm actually going to go back to an earlier project and show you exactly how I made this little tambourine pattern. Okay, let's have a quick look at this little tambourine pattern here. And that's what it sounds like. As far as the processing goes, the first in the chain is this little distortion plugin, which was free. I don't know if it still is, but I really love how this thing sounds on mid and high end frequency content. I'm just using it to give a little subtle boost here. Yeah, very subtle. And then I'm using an EQ just to clean up the unnecessary frequencies, rolling everything off below 2K and then rolling off the very tippy top. And then we have a delay here playing 8th dotted notes, or set to an 8th dotted timing, with around 30% on the mix, and then a little phasing happening just to give some subtle movement and modulation. As far as the pattern goes, there's just a simple little variation that happens every once in a while. You can see here there's just a little couple extra notes or hits at the end there. And that happens occasionally, looks like every 16 bars. And then I'm using that delay to create a little build effect in a few key spots in the track, with some automation. So you can see here, I am automating the mix of that phaser plugin. I'm automating the feedback distortion on that delay, as well as the overall mix of the delay. And that just creates a little build effect, which you can hear. Yeah, just to help build the energy in a few key moments in the track. So that is the tambourine. Let's move on. Next little sound here is this 8th hat. Which is literally just a simple little hi-hat playing 8th notes, and it's mono. And this is something that I just have in my sample library, that I made a long time ago. But when I have a lot of, you know, wide hats and shakers going on, sometimes I like to just mix this in really low, and just so I have some sort of like something in the center. And that again helps kind of tie everything together. Just a little EQ here, dipped out a little frequency at 8K, rolled off the lows, everything below, you know, 1.5K. Okay, and then we have this little top shuffle here. And this is quite subliminal. So let's have it let's solo this. So I'm trying to remember how I made this. So this probably came from a loop originally, and yeah. So what I did to make this was I found a loop that, you know, fit the groove quite nicely. And something that I like to do quite often is make a copy of the loop. I'll pan one hard left, one hard right, and then I'll experiment with playing those two different copies of the same loop, but play them in different sequences. So you get this really nice, interesting, wide sound, but it doesn't sound too disconnected because it's you know, it's the same loop, but they're playing in different sequences. So you get this really cool stereo effect. And I'm almost certain that's what I did to make this. And it just sits so low in the mix, but it's one of those sounds that you don't really notice it or can't really pick it out when it's playing, but when you take it away, you notice. So yeah, you barely notice it, but I just felt like it kind of added something to the groove. So that is the little top shuffle there. And then I have just a simple little shaker playing offbeat eights. And this has a little wave shaper just to give it a little boost, a little subtle distortion, and some EQ notching out that 4K area. Yeah. And then, you know, just taking off everything below around 1.5K and then taking a little bit off the top end as well. Okay. I have one more hi-hat top end drum element, and that's the rides that come in later on. So the rides come in over here in the second half of the track. And this is just a nice little 16 bar section that kind of gets the listeners ready, or gets you ready for the peak of the track. So the shaker off and the little top shuffle drops out and these rides come in. It's the only time they're present in the track is right here. Let's listen to these on their own. So they're playing eighth notes. Notched out a harsh frequency here around 3K-ish. You know, cleaned it up, rolled everything off below around 600. And you can hear that pitching down there. That's something I like to do sometimes to drop out a sound, particularly rides. I think it works nice on, you know, pitch it down a semitone or two, excuse me, and that kind of is a nice transition out. I can't remember. I probably made 2 copies of the rides here, you know, pounded one hard left and a hard right, and maybe gave them each a subtle different dose of distortion, perhaps, maybe slightly different ambient treatments, but I can't remember exactly because it's bounced to audio. But yeah, like I said, that's just kind of there to have a little section to kind of prep the listeners for the peak of the track. Okay, so that's pretty much all of the drums. And then I have, you know, some automation lanes here. We have just like some little delay accents that occur on occasion, a little reverb, long reverb accent. Let's hear this one here. Yeah, so that kind of happens on occasion, that little delay, a little 16th delay, just for little ear candy accent. And it's this one here. And that's just the H delay from Waves, a little ping pong setting. Some reverb as well. I like to, yeah, add reverbs on my delays. I just think it, yeah, settles it into the mix nicely. So reverb, little distortion with the defacer plugin, which I've showed you before, and then an EQ here with a pretty heavy boost at 2K. Sometimes on auxiliary tracks like this, whether it's reverb or delay or a combination of the two, I like to sometimes, you know, experiment with some heavy boost and just, you know, sweep the frequencies as a track is playing and see if there's any, you know, pockets that I can bring out that I think sound nice. And in this case, I thought 2K sounded good, so it's pretty heavy boost there, rolled off the lows, and then, you know, shelved off some of the high end, so we're not conflicting too much with the, you know, the main hats here. Then I gave it a little touch of this OTT, which is essentially just kind of bringing up some of the low levels. So that's that little 16th delay. And then, like I briefly mentioned when I was talking about the kick, I have this short little ambient reverb set up for the drums. And yeah, it's just using the Valhalla Room, the little touch of distortion, and then a bandpass filter. And all of the drums are going through that short delay. The hats just a teeny little bit, the percussion a little bit more, and the claps a little bit as well. Again, to kind of put all those drums in one single space. I think that really helps tie everything together. And while we're talking about auxiliary tracks here, I also have a parallel compression track set up for the drums. So I'm using the Helios 69 and first in the chain with a little boost at 100 Hertz and then a little boost at 4K. And I really like this little plugin. It has a great analog character to it. So I like to put that first when I'm doing parallel compression this way. And then I'm using just the SSL bus compressor, fast attack, fast release, high ratio, pushed up the makeup gain quite a bit. And that really, you know, pushes the drums forward and the speakers. Without it, with. I also have a distortion auxiliary track set up for the drums. This one I'm using the Devil Lock for, and then I just followed that with an EQ to make sure we're not getting too many wild stray frequencies, you know, far down in the frequency spectrum and up top as well. I mean, if I mute all the other tracks, I'm just listening to the distortion. Let's mute the kick for a second. I mean, really crunchy. But adding just a little subtle layer of dirt like that can just really, again, just really help put, you know, make all those sounds fit together. And adding a little dirt can just help it translate to smaller speakers better as well. And I just like what it does to the mix. I mean, and you only need a teeny little bit of it. So that's pretty much the drums summed up. And then I also have just this long reverb that I have set up, and I'm using a Tractor's 12 reverb. And that's just for some long delay accents on occasion. So that's pretty much it for the drums. And then just some basic automation happening. But let's move on to the bass. So we have the sub bass here. Just playing a simple 16th note rolling pattern. Now this is just a simple little patch that I made in Native Instruments Monarch. I believe it was, I can't remember if it was a saw or a square, but you know, filtered down really low, and I think just one oscillator, and that's all she wrote. Just playing a simple rolling 16th pattern. So yeah, I don't really have too much else to say about that. Let's see if there's any processing here. Just a little EQ here, and I'm assuming this cut here is probably a dip where the fundamental of the kick is occurring, just to help those two fit together. You can see a couple dips here, and that's to make room for some lower percussion sounds that come in on occasion. And then I have just a filter here with a simple little low cut at 100 Hertz, and I'm just automating that to turn on in just a few sections of the track, but I don't want to keep it on the whole time. So I just, yeah, switching it on and off, which I think is this right here. I don't usually do much processing with the bass. As far as actually on the insert itself, I like to keep the basses pretty clean. There is a few auxiliary tracks set up for the bass though as well. So I have a parallel compression track, but this time I'm using the 1176 for this. And then I also have a distortion track set up for my basses, and this time I'm using the driver plugin for that, and an EQ to follow that, just to clean things up, low cut, and then rolled off the top end. So without the distortion and the parallel compression. Let's move on. We have the mid bass, and for this, I'm going to again go back to an earlier project so I can show you exactly how I made this mid bass and greater detail. So here we go. Mid bass. Let's have a look, shall we? Just a little taste of it there. As far as where this sound came from, this came from a patch I made a while back in Massive, and I just sampled a one shot out of a previous loop that I made with that patch, and that's what I'm using in this project, is just a sampled version of that. And really simple pattern, just playing a simple little 16th note straight pattern. And as far as the processing goes, I have the UAD Harrison EQ, which I love very, very much. In this case, I'm just using it to roll off a little bit of the low end. And then I have this Freak Echo plugin by Valhalla, which I'm using to give a subtle pitch drift to the bass, and because it's playing that rolling repeating pattern, I want to give it some movement. So that's what this is doing. You can hear it without the shift. band with it. And then we have a delay. So again, I'm using the Fruity Delay 3. It's set to an 1/8 dotted, and it's mixed at 100%. So this is really giving it its groove. Okay, and then I have some reverb here, just a short ambience setting here. And then we have the Moog multi-filter, which I absolutely love. And this, I'm actually automating the drive a little bit as well as the cutoff. And then we have some sidechain. And we have some, this is just for volume automation throughout the track. I have this sent over to a couple auxiliary tracks as well. So the first one is this little chorus send. The low, very, very low ends rolled off on the input, and then just the stock chorus plugin just to thicken it out a little bit. I mean, it's just barely noticeable. Just super, super low. But then we have this delay here, which the mid bass is also going through. And on this delay, it's the H delay from Waves. And sometimes I like to experiment with unsynced timings. This can, if you get it to work right in the right circumstance, it can really, you know, make a sound really start dancing in its own little unique space in the track and really add to the groove. Sometimes it takes some fiddling to really get the setting right, but in this case, I quite liked it and I thought it fit well with the track. So I'm using a ping pong unsynced timing. And then we have a little bit of movement here, as you can see on the high cut or low pass of the delay. And then I also have it sent through an auxiliary distortion and parallel compression track as well. So. Okay, so moving right along. I have these low percussion hits here. Just to, you know, break up the groove a little bit, add some little accents in there, keep the beat interesting. I have just kind of a bracket EQ set up for these, you know, cutting the lows and some of the top end off, and then another EQ, just notching out a little frequency, probably some muddiness here at 188, and then some side chaining on this. This low perk here is going through both the compression, distortion, chorus, and then a little bit of this reverb as well. So I have a reverb aux track for the bass. It's just a kind of a short chamber setting on the Valhalla Vintage Verb. Just giving it a little space. And I'm pretty sure this just came from, you know, some percussion sample pack or something, or maybe a loop that I snagged it from. That I have a couple packs that I like to use these kind of sounds for, so I'm assuming that's where it came from. It's a sample. And then we have a low conga as well. Just mixed quite low. And you can hear the low congas kind of doing a left, right, back and forth type of thing. And that's just going through the compression. And then I have another Harrison EQ cleaning it up with a low cut and a high cut, and a little notch at 135, dipping out some mud, and then rolled off everything below 50 again here. Yeah, so a little low conga in there. And then we have these bass sweeps, which I quite like. Let's listen to those. Okay, so these came from a previous track that I made that I ended up not releasing and just kind of set it aside because I wasn't 100% happy with it. But there were some parts of the track that I really liked. And one of the parts was this big, long, sustained, heavily distorted bass sound. And what I did was I took that and I just cut a couple little pieces out of it that worked together. Originally, the sound came from, I think it was one of Native Instruments' Reactor, since I think it was the Rounds player in Reactor, if I remember right. But it was just a simple little sustained bass patch. But what really made this sound interesting was I set up an auxiliary reverb. I think it was just a big hall or plate reverb, and just heavily distorted the reverb for this sound. And that's what, you know, is giving it that kind of washed out, almost like distorted guitar sound. And then I just have some simple little fade, you know, volume fades here on these. And let's see if there's any other additional processing. So there's some EQs here. So it looks like there's two different EQs. They're both on the same mixer insert here, but I felt like each one of the little cuts needed a slightly different EQ. So instead of putting them on different tracks, what I did was I just automated the necessary EQ to turn on, you know, as needed. So, yeah. And then I have some delay here. And this is, an 8th dotted, just to give it a little extra movement. And then some auto panning as well, again, to just kind of move that around a little bit more, make it feel a little bit more alive. And this is just meant to kind of sit a little bit low in the mix and just be a nice contrast to the rolling, you know, mid bass and sub bass parts. And then just some extra side chaining on that as well. And I'm not sure what this is for. Couldn't tell you. Okay, so I only have, I think, one more bass element in this track, and it occurs in the breakdown here. Yeah, it's this sustained bass, which I'll let you listen to it, or part of it here. So obviously this is bounced to audio too, but I made this in Native Instruments Monarch as well. I use that a lot for bass sounds. Really simple patch, just two saw waves, slightly detuned, you know, heavily filtered down, shape the envelopes and the filter envelopes to taste, and that's pretty much it. I mean, it's going to that reverb send here as it approaches the drop, and just doing a simple little progression, and it's just meant to, you know, build the energy leading into the drop. I think it works nice with the mid bass, you know, changing notes there. So that's the sustain bass, really simple. And that's going to the reverb. It's getting a little bit of that chorus send, and it's also going through the distortion and parallel compression tracks for the basses. Okay. So I think that's pretty much the bass sounds sorted. Let's have a look at the synth parts. So first up, we have this little stab here. And in the beginning of the track, it's quite filtered down. Listen to one of these here. So obviously this one's bounced out too, but this is a little stab that I made quite some time ago that I still use from time to time. And how I made this is I combined two different soft synths to make one chord. So I used Native Instruments Monarch to play the root note of the chord, which was a B minor chord. This is a track is in B minor. And then I used a different soft synth, Massive, to, you know, complete the rest of the chord. And my thought was, you know, these soft synths do indeed have their own sound. Monarch is definitely, you know, it's modeled after a Mini Moog, and it sounds more vintage and analog, and Massive is a little bit more digital sounding. So I wanted to kind of create a unique little hybrid by combining the two to make one chord. And then I just, you know, shaped the envelopes and the filters to fit together nicely. I probably did some sort of processing, whether it was some saturation, distortion, maybe a little compression to kind of glue those two synths together as one. But that's how I made this stab. And yeah, it just works as a little accent occasionally. And that's going through this delay here, which I'll go through when I talk about the pluck here in a minute. And then I also have a couple other auxiliary tracks set up for the synth. So again, I have a parallel compression track and a distortion track for the synths. And the stab has some additional EQ on it here. So I'm just rolling off some of the low end, everything below 100, you know, pulling out probably some harsh frequencies here, maybe some muddy areas here around 300. And then some sidechain as well. So that's pretty much it for the stab. Then we have this little pad that is just meant to kind of drone along, and the breakdowns help fill out the breakdown. And it sounds like this. And yeah, just playing a simple little progression. But I obviously this is bounced out. There is a little bit of EQ work here, as you can see. You know, just dipping out some unnecessary or unpleasant frequencies, giving it a little lift around the 1.2K, rolling off the top, rolling off the bottom. I can't remember exactly where that pad came from, so let's move on. And that's just going through the compression and the distortion. Okay, so let's talk about this pluck, which is probably, or definitely is, the main kind of driving melodic theme of the track. So for this sound, we're going to go back to an earlier project, and I'll walk you through exactly how I made this sound, as far as the sound design and processing goes, and you know, my thought process when programming it as well. So let's go back to an earlier project, and I'll show you how I made it. Okay, let's walk through the pluck. Here is a little preview. All right, so I made this sound in Native Instruments Monarch. So let's have a look at the synth first. Pretty simple sound here. So I used 3 oscillators for this. The first one is a square wave, as you can hear there. The second oscillator is a saw, but up 1 octave. The third oscillator is another saw, but tuned up a 5th from the second oscillator. I mixed in a little bit of noise to thicken the sound out a little bit and add just kind of like an old school, you know, dirty, dusty feel. Gave it a little touch of feedback and pushed up the load a little bit just to give the sound a little bit more body and attitude. As far as the filter envelope and amp envelope, pretty simple pluck type settings here. Short attack, fairly short decay. I'm using a fair bit of resonance as well. And then I am giving it a little bit of modulation here with the mod wheel here. And that's being controlled with a subtle LFO. You can see this moving around a little bit. So that's the sound design within Monarch. There is a fair amount of processing on this pluck sound, so let's have a look at that. The first in the chain is this Omega N. I love this little saturation plugin. It just warms the sound up without it and with it. Then we have the Native Instruments driver plugin, just to beef the sound up even a little bit more. All I did to change the preset or default setting on this plugin is kick up the resonance a little bit, and that's just enough to give it a nice little boost. So without it and with. Okay, and then we have the Harrison EQ, which is essentially just bracketing the sound in, rolling off the lows that I don't need, taking a little bit off the top end, so I'm not interfering too much with the hats when it opens all the way up as far as the filter goes. Then I have a couple plugins just to kind of add a little touch of modulation, thicken things out a little bit. So we have this UAD delay modulation plugin. I usually use this for stereo delays, but in this case, I'm using this nice double preset, which is just thickening the sound out. Pretty subtle, mixed quite low, 10%. And then we have a little phasing going on, just to give it a little movement. This is mixed quite low, and I'm automating the mix of this plugin throughout the arrangement. And then we have some auto panning, again mixed quite low. I'm probably automating the mix here too, but I can't remember. And that's set to a quarter dotted cycle rate. And then we have a little bit of side chaining. And then this is the LFO I mentioned, that's just giving a subtle bit of movement to the modulation wheel on Monarch. Now I have a couple auxiliary tracks set up for this sound, so let's have a look at those. The first one, let's just look at the reverb first. So I think this is just the default setting here on Valhalla Room, and that's followed with a bandpass EQ just to keep things tidy. But you can see that there's some movement here with the actual send amount. So I've done that with a couple of these auxiliary tracks, and it's just I feel like it just makes it a little bit more expressive. So that's what this LFO is here. It's just a random LFO set to control, give a little bit of movement to the send amount. On simple repeating rhythms like this is something I like to do on occasion. Use random LFOs to inject a little bit of movement, unpredictability, and just make it feel a little bit more alive and interesting throughout the entirety of a track. Okay, so that's the reverb. I have it sent over to this delay as well. So I'm using the H delay, 8th dotted. I usually like to add a little reverb to my delay sends. I find it just helps it settle into the mix. It pushes it back a little bit as well in the mix, and just gives it its own kind of unique space. Instead of using a standard delay, in this case I used the space modulator, and it's one of these, there's a few of these lush reverb presets, which has kind of like some subtle chorusing and delay and bits of modulation in there. And in certain circumstances, I think it's a little bit more interesting than just a standard delay. So I thought it worked in this case. So it's mixed, kind of low, but it's just giving these delays a little extra space and movement. And then I'm distorting the reverbs and delays slightly with the defacer plugin, which I mentioned or showed you earlier. And then we have some auto panning here with the pancake from Cable Guys. Super simple. Move that around a little bit. Bandpass EQ to confine this into a specific frequency band, keep things tidy. And then I'm compressing all this a little bit with the 1176. And also I really like the color that this plugin gives. And then lastly, we have some sidechaining here. It's the same curve, sidechain curve that I'm using on the sound itself, but just mixed a little bit more aggressively. Okay, there's a couple more auxiliary tracks here. So the first one is this chorus, which is panned over to the left. And I'm using the Brigade chorus from UAD. And then again, you can see that there's a little movement with the send amount. So I'm just doing the same exact thing that I did with the reverb, just adding a random LFO set to a small range to fluctuate the send amount. And all these random LFOs are moving at different rates too. So to kind of counterbalance the chorus, I set up another auxiliary track panned over to the right. And this one has like a tremolo effect, moving at an eighth note. And then I use the little alter boy to pitch this up 5 semitones, but it's only mixed in around 20% or so with a little bit of drive, and then a very small frequency band. We're confining this to, again, to keep things tidy, so we're not just blurring everything else in the mix, and then a little touch of reverb on this as well. And I added the chorus and this tremolo aux aux tracks kind of as an afterthought. I just felt like I wanted to, you know, spread out the sound a little bit more across the frequency spectrum. So that's why I added these panned auxiliary tracks. But you can hear the sound. Let's hear it without any of the processing. I mean, if I take off the auxiliary tracks, it sounds super bland and boring. Yeah. And let's... So, okay. As far as the actual pattern goes, there's a couple different variations. So we have this one here. And that just kind of works as a little turnaround. And then we have this big change up right here that happens in, you know, 2 sections of the track. So when I was, you know, making the sound and programming it and trying to figure out how I wanted to use it in the arrangement, I wasn't sure if this would work to have that big of a change up with the pattern. But I think it turned out quite nice. You know, you have this repeating rhythm that's playing for quite some time before you get any sort of change up. And then when it finally happens, I think it creates a nice moment where it switches from a simple 1-bar pattern to, you know, a nice question and answer 2-bar phrase. And that's probably my favorite moment in the track, when it switches from that simple rhythm to the, you know, 2-bar question and answer alternative. And there's one thing I wanted to show you within the piano roll here. So let's have a quick look at that. Yeah, it's this one here. So on this little phrase here, you can see that I detuned this D note, and it's detuned 80 cents. So it's essentially playing more of a D sharp than it is a D. And D sharp is not present in the scale of this track. This track is in B minor. But when I was playing around with the notes and this phrase, I just thought the D sharp sounded better. So I was just going to play the D sharp, but I ended up just detuning it heavily, so so you're getting more of the D sharp. And my point is to not be afraid to experiment with incidental notes that are outside of the scale that you're working in. Sometimes they can really add to, you know, your sound. So in this case, I thought it worked quite nice. So I just wanted to mention that, you know, if it sounds good, it is good. In this case, I thought it worked quite nice. But other than that, I mean, it's just, yeah, simple little phrase there. And as you can see, there's a fair bit of automation happening throughout the track. Filters opening up, mix of the phase plugin, yeah, reverb, delay sends, what have you. Let's listen to a little section over here where the filter opens up. And there you go. There is the pluck. from Luna Brave. Okay, so one more thing I wanted to mention about the pluck, and that's this little pluck layer here. So let's listen to that. And this is just, you know, mixed quite low underneath the main pluck, but it's pitched differently. It's got some different delays happening. It's heavily band passed as well, and it's just meant to, you know, be an interesting layer to the pluck and add an extra layer of depth there. And I think they work nicely together. And you really miss it when you take it away. I also gave it, you know, a different ambient treatment as well to kind of put it in its own little unique space and just have it, you know, complement the main pluck and just add that extra layer of interest. And yep, that's what that's there for. You can see a little bit of volume automation happening. Let's move on. Okay, the synth swell here is another sound that I want to hop back to an earlier project so I can show you a little bit in more detail how I made this sound. So let's do that. Okay, so let's have a look at the synth swell. So the sound itself is coming from FM8. And if I remember right, it was a preset that was in the ballpark of what I wanted, but I ended up doing quite a bit of tweaking to get it sounding the way I wanted it to. And I did a fair amount of processing on it. But first, let's look at the pattern. It's really simple. So just a little 2-bar phrase here, really simple little rhythm, playing the B minor chord with a lower B note 1 octave down and some subtle velocity variations. Really simple. As far as the processing goes on this, I have this little volume plugin here, which was just for gain staging purposes. It's turned up quite a bit from where I originally had it set in this project, so you can hear it better. So the first in the chain is the LA2A compressor. Let's hear that. Yeah. So a decent amount of compression on this, around -5 dB. I love this compressor, especially on vocals, but I also like to use it on basses, pads, all kinds of stuff. It just has a really nice, smooth, creamy tone. So I wanted that kind of sound, and I really like the analog character that this plugin gives. So ran it through the LA2A, followed that with some saturation with this transformer plugin by UBK. I absolutely love this little plugin. Definitely adds some gain there as well, but yeah, this plugin just really seems to kind of bring things to life in a really pleasant way. And then I ran it through this EQ, just a little band pass, just so I'm kind of just getting those mid frequencies that I need and nothing else. Keep things tidy. And then I have another EQ. Oops. Let's make that smaller. So it looks like this is being controlled by an LFO. So I have this LFO here giving subtle movement to this low pass filter. And it looks like it's also controlling the drive. I'm guessing that's from the synth itself. So yeah, the overdrive here is being controlled by the LFO as well, just to give a little movement to the sound. And then I have a delay. So we're doing eighth notes here, a little distortion on the feedback, and the mix is set to 0, so I might have been planning on using this for automation. I'm not certain. Or maybe it was something I was trying out and didn't end up using. So. Which is probably the case. And then I have just a little sidechain on this. Not a little, a pretty aggressive amount of sidechain. And that is the synth swell. All right. So then we have this little synth groove here. And let's have a listen to that, kind of coming into the track here. So this little synth groove here is just meant to be a counter melody to the pluck. And as you can see, I mean, it's only plays in a few sections. It's just meant to help build the energy and work nicely with that pluck. And it was a really simple sound. It came from one of Yuhi's free plugins. I think it's called it's this one here, Podolsky. It has a nice little brass preset in it that I like to use sometimes, and that's where the source of this sound came from. And then I just programmed a simple little pattern that complemented the pad, or excuse me, the pluck, and it probably, you know, added some additional processing. There's definitely some delays or auto panning going on there. I can't remember exactly, but. And then in the second half of the track, you see again, it just creeps into the mix, and yeah, works well with the pluck, I think. It helps build the energy. And you can see a few little dips here. This is probably where looks like maybe the stab is occurring, maybe just to dip out a little space, yeah, when the stab comes in. So I just did some manual little fades there, to help those play nice together, because in this section the stabs are really opening up, whereas over here it's not even conflicting so much. Yeah. Okay, so that's a little synth groove. And then the synth groove is, it looks like okay, so there's some processing here. Let's take a look at this really quick. Using the Harrison here to quite heavily bandpass this. So, you know, we have a low cut, we have a high cut, a boost up here around, you know, 5.5K, and some additional EQ here, just pulling out some mud harsh frequencies in the mid-range, another low cut, and then some auto panning to give it some movement. And that's going through the distortion and the parallel compression tracks. Okay, so now we have this string that creeps up as we approach the breakdown. And then it just slowly fades up until we kind of reach the peak here at the drop, and then it holds its intensity for, you know, 4 bars or so, and then just falls away. And let's hear that on its own. Simple little string. This is a sample that I kind of made and processed quite some time ago. But if I remember right, it came from Korg's M1 plugin. And then you can hear there's some fluctuation with the volume. So I think I used Sound Toys tremolator to kind of give it that movement. But that's just there to, you know, help build the energy, build the tension leading into the drop. And yeah. Yeah, and this is something that I have in my sample library, but it looks like I pulled out a couple frequencies here. I mean, as you can see, I really don't do too much boosting. It's mostly all cuts. I mean, occasionally I'll boost like I did on, you know, this auxiliary track here, but the boosts are few and far between compared to the EQ cuts. Okay, so now we have this distorted pad. Which is mixed quite low. But you can hear there, just kind of the screaming kind of pad. Now, I can't remember exactly where this came from. I mean, obviously, I like to make a sound as I need it right then and there, get it sounding how I want it to, and then bounce it out and move on. I find I just can finish projects much faster that way, and that way I'm not tempted to go back and fiddle and fiddle and fiddle. So, but this probably came from, you know, one of my soft synths. Just found a pad that I liked that was super simple. Just played one long sustained note and then just really heavily distorted it. And it just, you know, obviously tucked right down in the mix. And again, this is another one of these sounds that you really don't notice until you take it away. But I just felt like it helped fill things out and really, you know, contribute to the overall energy level of the track. And you can see here, I did some volume automation. So in the first half of the track, it doesn't get quite as loud as it does in the second part of the track when we, you know, are at our peak. But let's just play this. See, you notice it when you take it out. Yeah. Yeah, you definitely notice when you take it out. I think that really just helps fill things out in the mid-range and, you know, build that energy. So that's what that is there for. Now all we have left is the effects. And you can see most of these are bounced to audio, so I'm really just going to skim through these quite quickly. But we'll have a quick look at them. So we have the atmosphere here. Which is pretty much doing, you know, that same thing throughout the entirety of the track. There's some volume automation that's happening in a few spots to just kind of, you know, help build the energy to some key moments, you know, going into little drop sections or what have you, and then some filtering so it kind of ebbs and flows and weaves in and out of the track in a nice way, you know, helping contribute to the energy level. And you use this Clean Sweep plugin for that. And then we have an EQ here. So there was some unpleasant frequencies, you know, in the upper mids here. So I dipped those out. I mean, this is something that I probably would have. I always spend a decent amount of time making my atmospheres, so I'm assuming it's probably a couple different sounds layered together, maybe looping at different lengths, and then I always kind of incorporate some sort of modulation in there as well, and then jam around with it, maybe do like a long jam. So that's the atmosphere. It just kind of gives it, a vibe straight from the get, right from the start. Let's see, we have simple little noise effects here. Pretty self-explanatory there. We have these little spacey hits, which I think contribute an important little role. They only play a couple times, but you can hear them coming in right here. They also occur over here. So the spacey hits, let's see if there's any processing here. Some EQ, notching out some unpleasant frequencies, rolling off the low end. There's a subtle variation here with a slightly different EQ and some delay. And again, I'm trying to remember where these came from, but I can't remember exactly. So let's move on. A little noise sweep here and a reverse cymbal, which help introduce this section where the sustained bass kicks in. And all these things are just meant to help smooth out transitions, add little bits of ear candy here and there, just to keep things interesting over the course of the track. The reverse cymbal, super simple, just a reverse cymbal with a bunch of reverb on it. This noise hit, just probably ran it through some extra reverb, maybe added some phasing or chorusing or flanger to it, make it a little bit more interesting. And those are just there to help introduce this section where the sustained bass kicks in. To help introduce the start of the breakdown, I have this little clap hit here, and that works in conjunction with this big, long 808 kick, which I didn't mention when I was talking about the drums, which is right here. So let's have a quick listen to that. Yeah, so we have that clap hit, clap effects here, which has just a standard, clap sample. It's kind of panned over to the right slightly. We have a big long reverb here. I'm going to have this set to 20 seconds. It's mixed quite high, and that just kind of washes into the breakdown. I think helps ease that transition or smooths that transition out. Just a little basic low and high cut on that, and then you get this long subby 808 kick as well, which I thought helped introduce the breakdown. And that's I also have this little noise reverse and hit coming in there as well. Okay. Let's see. So we have a couple little tonal effects here. Let's see. Noise riser, crash sweep. I mean, this is just your standard kind of white noise riser, and then some side chaining here. Yeah, I don't need to go over these. Crash sweep, essentially just reverse crash into a regular crash with some reverb on it. Sometimes I get some sort of like little delay with the automation here. Anyways, and it only happens when I am recording these videos. Anyways, we have a couple tonal effects here. Helping with the transitions, you know, just nice little bits of ear candy here. We have another, so I think that's the same one. We have this one here, which is kind of doing like a little panning deal. Yeah. See if we have any processing on these. All right. Some EQ there. Yep, bandpass again on the other tonal effect. So yeah, just little bits here and there. Got a little reverse clap. Little clap reverb there. Little reverse reverb effect that helps introduce the first instance of this stab that we talked about. Which is, I mean, just a super classic little trick, but it really does work quite well. So I have that happening a couple times, that little reverse reverb trick leading into some of the stabs that happens, you know, a few times. Just a basic crash here. We have these little space hits here, these little kind of spacey twinkles. Yeah, we can hear one here. Which again, I can't remember where these came from. It's been quite a while since I made this track, so but there's a few subtle variations on that little sound. Yeah, that are just pitched slightly differently. And then on these, I felt like, because I bounced these down as one stem, but I felt like the different hits needed slightly different EQs. So instead of cutting them up, I just, and putting them on different tracks, I, you know, just am automating on and off the appropriate EQ for each hit here. And then I have a little, just little effects at the start of the track here, like a little vocal cut with some, you know, reverbs and delays on it. Which is something I like to do. I like to put some sort of little effect hit or wash, or could just be a simple white noise splash at the beginning of my tracks. So that's just, yeah, doing its thing there. And then I have these little noise blasts, and these are just layered on top of the snares, and they pop in occasionally, but it's just a nice little burst of white noise that is just, I think, a really cool little accent that happens occasionally. Hear that there. So just a simple little trick, and I think that works quite well, just to kind of spice things up, you know, little bits of ear candy. So I mean, that's Luna Brave. Pretty much went over all of the sounds, and yeah, I hope that you got something out of this little breakdown. Feel free to hit me up if you have any other further questions or comments. Thanks everyone, and take care.